Chapter 21 The Country Priest. Thefia and Linsco did find someone who offered her horse, but as the horse could not carry 3 people, Linsco rode it while Thefia and the girl walked with him. Well, at first the girl rode, but then Linsco refused to stop to rest, nearly collapsed from exhaustion, and begrudgingly accepted the horse. It should have only been about 6 days, but it took 8, and they finally reached it on the first Dechadi, a little before Mandamandi. By then, Linsco was not doing well. Though he was not unresponsive, he was almost silent. It was not that he did not want to speak, but that he could not. He had tried, but no matter what, no sound would come out. It was as if he had forgotten how, or something was stopping him. A little like how he usually could not speak louder than a mumble, though he doubted this was from Sio's meddling. In addition, though Linsco's words had given him some hope, his failure and defeat by Garimpo still weighed heavily on him, and though living without his left hand was not unbearable, it was annoying, and he hated that basic things had suddenly become difficult or impossible, and that D'Artagnan and Sorenson had become practically worthless, or at least impractical, to him. He felt almost useless, and he hated it. Physically, the stitches were falling apart, the makeshift bandage was dirty, and, worst of all, it and the other less major injuries that had mostly gone untreated had gotten infected. Thefia had started crying when she awoke on the Shemachludi, and he was beside her, far warmer than he should have been. The events of the past week had crashed into her. One of the worst people in history had returned from yet another death. He had taken the hand of her best friend, and, it seemed, his resolve as well, the fire that had always burned within him. Another of her greatest friends was missing, possibly captured, or worse. Her king, queen, prince, and princess, whom she had sworn to protect, were missing as well, their fates uncertain. Even with her conflicted feelings about the queen, she did not wish death on her. Her mother, siblings, and most of Linsco's siblings were in a town overrun by Rossene, and the vocations of Linsco's remaining siblings would make them targets. Thefia had failed to protect her country, arrived too late to save her best friend's hand, and now had not even been able to keep him healthy. She managed to calm herself down before Linsco awoke, though he was half asleep at the time and heard it, and their companion had awoken, and they had a short conversation about it. "You can't help him like this," she told herself. "Keep moving." She briefly considered what this could mean for her near future, contemplated how annoying it would be since she would be staying with Linsco and his brother, a priest, and then set out trying to find food. She tried to act cheerful and like nothing was wrong, but Linsco tired of that immediately, so she stopped, though she still tried to hide some of her distress. That evening, as she went to bed, Thefia cried again. Though her back was to him, Linsco could tell she was by the shaking of her shoulders. He was unsure of what to do, but decided to put his arms around her. She turned around to face him, crying. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to wipe her eyes with her hands. "I don't know why I'm crying." She tried to laugh. Linsco shook his head and pulled her close to him, letting her cry on him. He did not care if it got his shirt dirty. He did not know or care how he loved her. He did in some way, and he wanted to help her. When she calmed, they pulled away, though Linsco kept his arms around her. His shirt was stained with tears, and her wimple was crooked. She smiled at him. "Thank you, Elinsco," she said. He smiled back, and for the first time since he had lost his hand, it did not feel forced. He liked that she had used his real name. Since gaining their companion, they had not been alone, and he had not heard her say it. He pulled her close to him again, but not against him. Their faces were mere inches apart. Finally, Thefia leaned in and kissed him. Linsco accepted it, and finally, both admitted to themselves that they did love each other like that, in the way their siblings said they did. Thefia told him as much when they pulled away. "Elinsco, She trailed off, avoiding Linsco's eyes. She sighed and blushed. "I hate to think what our siblings would say about it, but I think—" She shook her head and met his eyes. "I love you. Not as my friend, not as my brother. I want to marry you." He blushed as well, but nodded in agreement. She took his hand and they fell asleep. When she woke, she was still holding it. Soravigno was a town so small it was a wonder it had a parish, even smaller than Carvigno. They parted ways with the girl outside the rectory. "We're here, Cacalcicio. We just have to get inside," Thefia said as she got him down from the horse. She spoke in the same tone she would use trying to encourage a tired little boy. She had been calling him Caro and herself Farelia as they traveled. Linsco did not look up, despite his annoyance, which worried Thefia. She often slipped into her mothering tone when he was sick or injured, and he hated it every time. At least there were several years between him and his siblings. There were only a few months between him and Thefia. He found other things annoying too, like how cold he was, despite his thick cloak, how the world was making less sense, his inability to talk, and how he could not walk on his own, either having to lean against Thefia or ride the horse. Besides being annoyed that he could not walk on his own, leaning against her also made him painfully aware of his unimpressive height. He tried not to show it, though, both his pain and annoyance. He knew, despite her efforts, that she had a lot to worry about. He did not want to add to the list. They knocked on the door, and it was answered by Father Jouvin. Like all Linsco's siblings, he was a rather large man, easily a foot taller than his little brother, and the height difference between him and Thefia was about the same as the one between Linsco and Elinsco. Whether his hair was blonde or brown was a topic hotly debated, and conflicts that could only be described as wars had begun over it. His eyes were brown, and he wore a cassock, of course. He smiled when he saw them. "You two got married and didn't tell me?" he said with mock offense. "And by another priest? How dare you?" Linsco glared at him, but Thefia managed to smile. "We did, Father. I'm sorry we didn't tell you." Confusion crossed the priest's face for a second, and Thefia's tone and expression became serious. "Cacalcicio's hurt. We need your help," she said. He nodded. "Follow me." They went inside his house and sat at the table. Father Jouvin took their cloaks, but dropped them when he saw the mess of scarf and blood. Confusion turned to disbelief and then to anger. "All right, who did it? Who am I killing?" he said, sounding much like Balasha also after learning of Linsco's capture. Thefia shook her head. "No one." "So then I guess his hand just fell off?" His voice was rising. "No. Then what happened?" He was almost shouting. "Who hurt my brother?" She sighed. Linsco looked at her and nodded. She had to tell him. He had a right to know. "You've heard of what's going on in Soledo? What, that nonsense about the Jarissa King returning?" Thefia shook her head. "It's real. I saw him myself. Somehow the Jarissa King returned, and Elinsco tried to fight him," she said. Father Jouvin sighed and sat down. "Oh, Linsco Giso, why would you ever do that? If you thought that was the Jarissa King, why in the world would you think it was a good idea to fight him?" Linsco did not answer. "He's the Ajaciko, that's why," said Thefia. Father Jouvin blinked. "Is that a joke? Because we used to say that?" Thefia shook her head. "No." She sighed. "I know it all sounds crazy, but I promise it's all true. You can hold us on Yelosa yourself if you want proof." He sighed. "Why didn't you tell me? How long have you known?" "We didn't have a chance," Thefia said. "It's too dangerous to put something like that in a letter. And we found out in Chivierami. We were traveling to Savine with the Queen and her family, and the rest of the Akasiki visited Elinsco." He sat forward. "Really? What are they like?" "In his words, Zebelkon's Tonitaran cousin. Duke Elinsco's a lot like his descendant." Father Jouvin sighed. "Zebelkon's what you call Lord Giuseppe, right?" She nodded. "Guess I shouldn't be surprised, with what time they came from." He blinked and stood. "Sorry, I should have gotten you two some chairs." "It's fine. I know this is a lot to take in," Thefia said. He pulled up some chairs and they sat. Then he looked at Linsco. "Ushakiso?" he prompted. "Do you want to tell us about them?" Linsco looked down. Thefia sighed. "I don't think he will. I don't think he would, even if he weren't sick. He hasn't said nothing since the Jarissa King cut his hand off. Hasn't even made a sound." Father Jouvin sighed. Oh, Linsco quiso. Linsco crossed his arms, still avoiding his brother's gaze. The priest looked at Thefia. How's he doing? Thefia sighed, resting her head in her hands and worrying she would start crying. Not great. Got infected, not to mention how he can't or won't talk. He felt Linsco's forehead. He has a fever. Bit of a high one, too. I ain't surprised. You two did just walk across half of Sonera and Ozen. She sighed again. I know. She blinked, feeling a lump rising in her throat. I tried to help him. I tried to keep it clean, but I couldn't, and he got sick anyway. Father Chanval put a hand on her shoulder. It's all right. You did what you could. She sighed. I guess. All right, let's see how you did, the priest said, turning back to his brother. Linsco held out his arm a little grudgingly. Father Chanval untied the makeshift bandage and examined the wound, which looked very bad, a mess of blood and what remained of the thread. He sighed. Thefia, what was the one thing I told you all not to do? Use normal sewing needles and thread, she said. He looked at her. And what did you do? She sighed. I know, I used normal sewing needles and thread. She looked up. But I didn't have no choice. I had to stop it from bleeding, and I didn't have no time to worry about that at the time. Well, this is what happens when you do. He frowned. Don't Cecil have a doctor? Why didn't you ask her? She shook her head. No, I couldn't. She'd be the first one they asked about us, and I didn't want to get her in trouble. People need her. That, he sighed, looking a little frustrated. You should have gone to her. He stood to gather his supplies. Why didn't you burn it? I couldn't, she said. There weren't no fire or heat sources around. She fidgeted. Why ain't he talking? Do you know? He frowned. The only time I've seen something like this is this one man I know who seems to get overwhelmed easier. Sometimes he lashes out and almost seems to throw a fit like a little boy, but sometimes he seems to completely retreat, stops talking, won't meet your eyes and barely moves. I don't think that's what's happening to Ulbinios, though. I've heard of something that could be this. I've heard of people who goes through something terrible and just stop talking. Maybe it's a little like what happens to that man, but it lasts longer, and Ulbinios is more responsive. He looked at Thefia. Don't worry, Thefia. I'm sure he'll recover. She sighed. He frowned, sitting back down with them. What I need to do... It'll be painful. Linsco looked up and shook his head, and Father Chanval gave him a look. Oh, Shakiso, I can't in good conscience let you go through that, especially not with you being my brother, he said. Linsco glared at him. Linsco quiso? His tone was warning, but Linsco just shook his head. Father Chanval sighed, giving up on diplomacy. Thinking he had won the argument, Linsco relaxed, and his brother took the chance, taking one of his rags and pressing it to the boy's face. Linsco tried to pull away, but he put his other hand behind his head, holding it in place. Linsco's eyes went wide, and then he glared at him, trying to resist, to hold his breath. No matter how much he would like to, he could not hold it forever, nor could he fight his brother's concoction, especially since he had already breathed in some of it in his initial surprise. It was not enough to send him to sleep, but it did make his head spin. His originally fierce glare weakened. His lungs screamed for air, and finally he broke and gasped, breathing deeply. Keeping his head up and his eyes open became a battle. Linsco recognized this feeling and hated it even more than he had in Cheviarangi. He hated the feeling of everything spinning out of control, yet not being able to move his own limbs, not being able to do anything to stop it. All he could do was keep breathing. His gaze lost focus, and his eyelids fluttered as he blinked, still futilely trying to stay awake, before they finally drifted shut. Linsco slumped forward, asleep. Father Chanval caught him and sighed. I'm sorry, Linsco quiso, he said. He looked at Thefia. I'm going to move him to a bed. Can you take my bowl and fill it with snow? Thefia nodded, though she looked uneasy. Look, I don't like it either, but your acting like a child stopped working years ago, and this is the only other option, he said. One of Linsco's siblings' favorite ways to get him to do something he did not want to do used to be telling him he was acting like a child. Being compared to a child was something he hated, so that had worked until he realized why they were saying it. She sighed and put her wimple back on, then took the bowl and went outside. Father Jeanval picked up Linsco and set him down on the extra bed he had for patients. He set a chair down beside it, brought his things over, and began the work he could do without Thefia's snow, removing the stitches. As usual, he was whispering a prayer while he worked. Just after he finished, Thefia came back with the snow. "I'm back," she said. He nodded. "Good. Bring it over here," he said. She brought it and a chair over and sat beside him. "Thank you, Thefasija," he said. He sat back and mixed something with the snow, then used it to treat the infection, resuming his prayer. "Are you going to burn it?" Thefia asked. Father Jeanval nodded. He used heat from the fireplace to do that, then cleaned it again and bandaged it. He let it rest on Linsco's chest. "Well, I've done what I can for his hand. Is there anything else?" Thefia nodded and showed him Linsco's smaller, less obvious injuries, and he treated them. Then he took the rag off his little brother's face and put his things away, before sitting with Thefia, leaning back and sighing. "Well, I've done what I can for now," he said. She sighed as well. "Thank you, Father." She looked up. "When will he wake up?" "Shouldn't be long." He looked at her. "You should rest, Thefasija. I'll tell you when he wakes." She shook her head. "No, I'm fine." "Thefasija, just 'cause you ain't sick don't mean you don't need rest too," he said. "You ain't the only one who just walked across half of Senera and Ozen. And don't pretend you ain't worried. The boy you love just got his hand cut off and now is infected and he can't talk. No one blames you for worrying." Thefia sighed, the exhaustion of the past week washing over her. "You're right." She realized what he had called Linsco and looked up, blushing. "Except about him being the boy I love. We're friends," she added hastily. "Friends who will get married when he's better," she thought, "and have figured out how to tell you." He smiled and she narrowed her eyes. "Right," he said. "So you can take my bed." Thefia shook her head. "No, I can't do that to you. What's wrong? I ain't using it until nighttime." He was, however, fully planning to let her take his bed and to sleep on the floor. She sighed. "All right." She took off her shoes and climbed into his bed, falling asleep almost immediately. Father Jeanval took Linsco's shoes and, since he was shivering, got him under the covers. He put everything back in order, then sat back at Linsco's bedside. After a little, Linsco's eyes fluttered open. Father Jeanval smiled. "Good morning," he said. Linsco glared at him, though it was weak, and tried to push himself up to sit. Father Jeanval put a hand on his chest. "Don't sit up yet, Binos. Come on, you know this." Linsco huffed and crossed his arms, still glaring. He hated everything about what his brother had done. He hated not being able to bear the pain awake. It made him feel weak, like a child. Of course, stubbornly refusing it made him look petulant and childish. Also, after his capture in Cheviaramni, he hated being forced to sleep. This situation, him sick and injured in bed, and his brother sitting at his bedside to care for him, was one very familiar to him, and one that did not help his annoyance about being treated like a child. All that was missing was his brother telling stories. Being Father Jeanval, they were mostly from the Levang, and, if not, the story of Elinsco Sico. "Look, I'm sorry about that, but I weren't going to let you go through that, and you're acting like a child stopped working years ago," Father Jeanval said. Linsco rolled his eyes, and the priest shook Thefia gently. She blinked sleepily. "What?" "Ushakiso's awake," he said. She sat up, suddenly alert. "He is? Is he all right?" Father Jeanval looked at Linsco. "Are you?" Linsco nodded, but he still looked annoyed. "Ain't as bad as when Mechikisa kicked me," he thought, despite everything. Thefia sighed with relief, then looked at him, knowing what he was thinking. "Elisisho, if you didn't want her to get mad at you, you shouldn't have asked her that. And you knew she was getting mad easier. Why do you think it was a good idea?" Linsco rolled his eyes. "You've said this already. And how am I supposed to keep girls from getting mad when I don't know what I'm asking about that's making them mad?" She smiled and shook her head. He sighed. Father Jeanval looked at Linsco. "I've done what I can for now, Bean. I'll let you stay here as long as you can, and I want you to stay here at least until Binos is better. Binos, you'll sleep here, and Thefasija, you can take my bed." She shook her head. "I'll take the floor. It's fine." "No, you're the guest. You're taking the bed," Father Jeanval said. Linsco shook his head. Father Jeanvin looked at him, giving him his best older brother look. Oh, no. You're my baby brother, and my patient. I ain't letting you sleep on the floor. Linsco glared at him, as he always did when they called him a baby. It especially annoyed him then, after everything that had happened. Galiquiso, you ain't no baby, but you'll always be our baby brother. Father Jeanvin smiled and rubbed his head affectionately, as siblings do. Linsco squirmed, batting his hand away, and then tried to straighten his hair, which, between his missing hand and his unreliable coordination, was difficult. Father Jeanvin put out a hand to help, but he batted it away and glared at him again, his face burning and redder than Garinfon's hair. Father Jeanvin put his hands up in surrender. All right. He addressed both of them. So, why are you two acting like you're married? She sighed again. Not 'cause we are married. Why do you keep insisting on that anyway? You're a priest. And I'm his brother. It's part of my job to assume he's in love with every girl around his age that he talks to and ain't related to. The only reason is just you, is 'cause it's clear you two are in love. They glared at him. He smiled a little. Thefia frowned. She had said she loved Linsco on Hiladi night, and he had nodded in response. So why did she refuse to admit it to Father Jeanvin? Both she and Linsco remembered that night, as well as the last alarm de Vierge. They had not spoken of it on Hiladi night, but they were both thinking about it. Linsco and Thefia shared a glance. It was clear they were thinking about the same thing. Navasija, you didn't answer the question, Father Jeanvin said, his voice breaking through their thoughts. Why are you acting like you're married? Thefia blinked and looked up. Oh, 'cause running around with short hair and pants is practically announcing that I'm a soldier, and the Jarissa King will be looking everywhere for us. A woman traveling with her husband is less memorable. And he's looking for a boy and a girl who won't be able to marry until Fulgek not a married couple. And if they know as much about us as Elinsco says they do, they'll know that all of you keep insisting we're gonna get married and that we say we won't because it ain't like that and we're just friends. Which we are. Not, she thought with another glance at Linsco. All right, he said. Was that a hint of a smile she saw on his face? She narrowed her eyes. Had he guessed at her thoughts? So why didn't you tell me he was the Ajecico? He asked. Do the others know? We didn't have no chance to, and yes, they do, except for Sister Ajecica. Thefia frowned. Well, I guess Piatakisa don't really know, but she's only one. He sighed. So if you didn't want to involve Linziso's doctor, why not go to the one in Casedo? He fled, Thefia said. Father Jeanvin stopped and looked at her. What? He did? How could he do that at a time like this? He said in disbelief. Thefia shrugged. I don't really blame him with what's happened, he sighed. Yes, I understand it's probably bad there, but he has a duty to them. If our town were in danger, I'd be the last to leave. She nodded. I guess you're right. Father Jeanvin frowned. Don't you have another friend, that Braden boy? Oh, what was his name? Where is he? Thefia frowned. She had not thought too hard about Linsco. She had been so busy trying to keep herself and Linsco safe that she had barely thought about him. She silently cursed herself for that. Linsco, but everyone calls him Linsco. I don't know where he is. Last I saw, he was fighting the Jarissa King. Father Jeanvin blinked and put his hands out. All right, back up. Tell me what happened. She sighed. Well, when the Jarissa King attacked, Linsco, Jarissa, and I got the princess and her family as far away from Linziso as we could, but we realized that Elinsco was missing. He'd stayed back to fight the Jarissa King. Linsco, Jarissa, and I went back there to make sure he was all right, and when we found him... She fidgeted, and Linsco looked away. He was on the ground, the Jarissa King standing over him. My goodness, there was so much blood. I didn't think about it. I just ran in there and took him in the sword and got out of there. Linsco, Jarissa stayed back to hold back the Jarissa King, and I did what I could and left. Linsco tried to hide his discomfort, but his face paled. Father Jeanvin tried to put a hand on his shoulder, but he batted it away. The priest sighed. I hope he's all right. We'll keep him in our prayers, Father Jeanvin said. He smiled a little. And you two say you ain't in love. They blushed and glared at him. He laughed. Then he frowned. So who am I supposed to say you are? I doubt you want everyone to know that you're the Ajecico and his future wife. Father! Thefia snapped. He smiled. So who are you then? She sighed. I've been calling him Tajo and myself Aurelia. I noticed. Are you sure that's a good idea? Bobo's name was Garincho and Mercedes is a Faralian name, not to mention your sister. Mariquisa's name, too, if you stretch a little, he said. Selina Merceda and Monsa Merceda were two of Faralie's many titles. In the south, especially Beretta, they would sometimes name children Faralia Mercedas. For example, Lonxeu's stepsister. Meria meant sea, and Faralia meant star of the sea. Despite that, Meria was not usually considered a Faralian name. If it was combined with Azea, star, or Faralia, yes, but just Meria, no. Thefia nodded. I know, but they're all so common. Bobo said you should choose a common name when you do this. Another Caro or Faralia is a lot less memorable than Alitha and Lirio. Or, judging by what happened last time, Aifetha and Oximlo, she thought. Oximlo was particularly egregious, considering a nasal vowel never came before an L. He looked a little unsure, but did not press it. So then why did you come to me? She frowned. Maybe we're distant cousins? He nodded. All right. And you fled here from a town just north of here. If you're gonna stay after he gets better, say it got burned down. That sounds all right. Linsco frowned. What is it, Alicijo? Thefia asked. He said nothing, and she frowned, thinking. He acted like he knew us when we first saw him. Is that it? She asked. He nodded. All right. She looked at Father Jeanvin. What about that? I think our enemies have spies everywhere, she said. The priest frowned. Well, how about... Before you two got married, you were very sick and I helped you. So since you were all right, the two of you could get married. Do you already have a story about how Ulbinos lost his hand? She nodded. We were on pilgrimage by Soledo, and his hand was cut off while we were fleeing, she said. She smiled. For a priest, you sure didn't hesitate in coming up with a lie. He shrugged. Well, we don't really have a choice. It would put you in too much danger to tell the truth, and people will want to know. Ask sister for the long version. The very long version. He glanced outside. It's almost lunchtime. What do you want? Thefia smiled. Honestly, anything. We haven't had no good meal since Soledo. He nodded. I'll make potato stew, then. He found a soup pot. You two can just rest. I'll cook. Thefia nodded, but Linsco shook his head. He was not hungry, and he wanted to help, even though he could not do much with his missing hand. We can peel potatoes if you want, Thefia said. She can, Linsco thought bitterly. Father Jeanvin shook his head. No, you two rest. I can cook. She sighed. All right. She decided to nap again, while Linsco tried and failed to stay alert. The battle against infection would last days, and it had only just begun. The fog of fever rose to consume him, and he sank into it, his eyes losing focus. He saw Lonxeu, dead or captured. He saw his siblings his siblings. He saw Ethisica, taunting him. Worst of all, he saw Garento, with hair and eyes that, together, looked like flame, saying words he could not remember. At some point he must have fallen asleep, since the next thing he remembered was Father Jeanvin shaking him awake. It's lunchtime, Binos, he said, and I don't care if you ain't hungry, you need to eat. Linsco rolled his eyes. He sounded like Thefia. Despite that, he struggled out of bed and sat at the table with Thefia and his brother, rejecting the offers from either of them to help him walk, even though he barely could. He was a little worried about what eating soup with his right hand would be like, since it required more dexterity than eating whatever Thefia had been able to find. Luckily, he found that it was surprisingly easy, though it felt strange. He was not very hungry, and, though he would never admit it, wanted to go to bed more than anything, but he ate anyway and forced himself to stay awake. Thefia and Father Jeanvin talked about what had happened since they had last seen him around the previous Dralirviesh. Father Jeanvin talked about village drama, and Thefia told him about soldier drama, especially Zabocron, his friends, and Lonxeu, because that was the drama they were most involved in. Father Jeanvin sighed. I should have expected as much from an Aquinsan. He truly sounds like his parents' son. What do people have against Beretta? Ella, Thefia answered, and farmers. It's all Cineran nobles and rich merchants up there. Linsco frowned, thinking of some of the things Azanyelosa had said about them. Thefia looked over. What is it? She asked. Linsco shook his head. Too hard to explain with the gestures and facial expressions he was limited to. Father Chanfin frowned. But Lonxu's a shopkeeper or merchant's son, right? That ain't that poor. Thefia nodded. Neslincier's grandson, but that don't make no difference to them. What? He said incredulously. You made friends with the Neslinciere? She nodded again, smiling. Yes, but we didn't know it until Chevier-Ami. We were in Sillery to get an alliance with the Gireni and ran into him. What's he like? She shrugged. He don't like what Linsco and Jarissa did, becoming a soldier and all. He wanted him to be a merchant instead. That ain't surprising, I guess, with what he's done. He nodded to Azanyelosa. So, how'd you get that? Thefia sighed and Linsco fidgeted. When we were going back to Sillery, we were attacked by Rosene. She paused and took Linsco's hand. They took him. The Rosene did, or maybe the Soledo, and they made him their puppet, Thefia said. Linsco looked down and she squeezed his hand. Father Chanfin sighed. How has all of this happened without me knowing? We haven't had a chance to tell you. He sighed again. I know, but still. He frowned. How'd they catch him? She smiled a little. It's a little funny, actually. They set a trap with pears and pots. He said he knew it was a trap, but still fell for it. Really? If it weren't so terrible, I might laugh. Father Chanfin smiled as well. That was very Linsco of you. Linsco rolled his eyes, and Father Chanfin sat back. My goodness, you and the pots. So what does she have to do with this? Well, Sio told us how to find Azanyelosa and said that she'd break the mage's hold on him, Thefia said. Linsco frowned and looked at Azanyelosa. I bet he didn't tell you the cost, he thought. I see, Father Chanfin said. He paused. Your Badia got married. Thefia blinked and looked up. Even Linsco looked up. I have a Badia? She said. He nodded. She and Adiothea Khasija weren't close, and she's been missing for over 10 years. He smiled. She's around my age, actually, which is a little funny to think about. Another interesting thing with the ages of Linsco's siblings and Thefia's family was that Belasha Loso was less than 10 years younger than Viamirsha and Ferron. Anyway, we don't really know what she and her husband were doing, and at this point, we're a little afraid to ask, he continued. I think they were working for the Rosene, but I ain't sure. There's a little girl they're taking care of, Viasinia. She's been through a lot. Again, we're a little afraid to ask. Whatever it was, it weren't good. Thefia frowned. Sinia, she's Ardaren? She is. Thefia and Linsco exchanged glances. A young Ardaren girl who had been through something terrible. They had both seen what had happened to the Sirote who had been captured by the Rosene. Was she one of them? They wanted to ask, but decided they did not want to bring up the way the Sirote were treated. And you're Boldios Cineran, Father Chanfin continued. Really? That's interesting, Thefia said. He also a Soledo? What are their names? I don't think he is. Your Badia's named Vila, and her husband's named Luzmo. He's actually the man I mentioned earlier, the one who gets overwhelmed easily. But we only call them that when we're alone. Instead, Luzmo's Elmo, Vila's Elia, and Viasinia's Fefasika, he explained. They mostly wander around, but sometimes they visit Adyamir Shasija or me. Thefia looked thoughtful. Vila. I think I met her once. He looked up. Really? She nodded. Back when Elisija was captured, Soledo gave me some clothes to use a disguise, and when I did, someone called me Vila. Oh, that's funny. He frowned. Actually, Luzmo lost his hand too. Linsco looked up and he nodded. I think it was back in Hewatlelo. He took it a lot better than you did, though. Linsco narrowed his eyes. What do you want me to call the fact you haven't said nothing in a week? He did do that thing where he stopped talking, but not as long as you, and he said it weren't just 'cause of his hand, he said. Linsco frowned. I wonder why that is, Thefia said. Father Chanfin shrugged. Everyone reacts differently to things. I asked him about it, and he just said losing his hand weren't the only bad thing that happened to him, but he didn't want to talk about it. Linsco sighed. This was also part of what was bothering him. Not everyone who lost his hand would completely stop talking like this, so why did he? He had things to worry about too, mainly how he was going to kill Garento with only one hand. Perhaps that was it. He had not just lost his hand, but lost his fight with Garento. He had lost his opportunity to save his country. Already the bishops, except Bishops Villadelo and Ferron, as well as the Bishop of Alenia, had been killed, and only Jarissa had dared take a stand against him. Well, they went to Adiamir Chassija and the rest, and told them who killed Adilfer Chassisho, Father Jonfin said. Thefia frowned, and Linsco looked up. But no one killed Bobo. Apparently, someone did, said Father Jonfin. Thefia sat back. Someone killed Bobo. She was thinking many things, but for some reason the loudest of her thoughts was, I can't believe Miyakisa was right. Father Jonfin nodded. Vila says it was a woman named Caresha who's been calling herself Ethisica, said Father Jonfin. Her sisters have very similar names to her real name, so don't get them confused. Luzmo says one of them, Cara called Carasica, is actually a nice woman. Thefia blinked and looked over at Linsco, who had a similar expression. Her real name is Caresha? But it's so normal! Father Jonfin smiled a little. And here's the part where Sister would point out that Caresha being such a common name should really make it less surprising that it would be hers. Thefia inclined her head. Well, yes, but she's just so terrible. How does she have such a normal name? He nodded. So you know her? She sighed and glanced at Linsco. I wish I didn't. She was working with the Rosene. Have you heard about the Soledo working with the Jarissa King? He frowned. That's real? I thought it was just calumny. Thefia nodded. It's real. Not all of the Soledo are with them, though. Anyway, we ran into them when we were trying to rescue Elisisho. I'd rather not talk about it with him here. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. She and Linsco let out a long breath. But at least we know the truth. He nodded again, then frowned. I need to write to them. They'll all be worried about you, and maybe Luzma will be able to help Ulbinos. Thefia looked up. Even Linsco looked worried. You're going to tell them? Over a letter? At the very least, Father Elmino's going to read it. I won't use your names, Father Jonfin said. But I have to tell them you're safe. I don't want them to worry. Thefia looked up. So you have no problem lying to everyone about who we are, but not telling everyone we're here is where you draw the line? He sat back. This is different. They're family. She sighed. Just be careful. Linsco looked unsure. Father Jonfin nodded. I will. He got a paper and pen and wrote his letter, in Adelcite, of course. After he was done, Thefia fidgeted awkwardly, thinking of something. Father Jonfin looked up. What is it? Could I go to confession? Thefia asked. He nodded. At Mandamangi, he said. That's when confession times are. He smiled. If you're worried about the old women who take half an hour to say their confessions, we can head over at the same time. Thefia frowned. I've always wondered about those. What are they saying? Father Jonfin drew back, looking like she had suggested he kill someone. Theophasia! I hope you didn't just ask me to tell you someone's confession. She looked up, still frowning. But they aren't really confessing sins, are they? What do they do that takes so long? He shook his head. I can't tell you that. Queen Silenda and King Ridero were at least kept together. One kindness that had not been given to Cara and Fiesel, but anything that could be a weapon was taken from them. And their hands and feet were bound hopelessly tightly. They sometimes worried the blood flow to their hands and feet would be cut off. Silesisha, said King Ridero. Queen Silenda looked up. What is it, Risisho? He paused. I do not want us to die without having this resolved. What? He sighed. Everything with Garisha, and especially Fiesel. I am sorry for how I acted. I think you should have let them go, but I could have handled it better. She nodded sadly. I know. I regret what I did too. I know it would have been the right decision to release Fiesel, and perhaps I should have let Jarissa go as well. And I certainly should not have arrested Theophonsia or Elinsco. What I did during the war. Sometimes I do not recognize it as me doing it. I feel as though I became a different person during that time. I wish I could go to confession before we die. I know they will not let us, but I wish I could. She was wrong. They did get to go to confession. Jarissa was a heretic, not an apostate. He nodded. As do I. War changes people. Sometimes for the better, more often for the worse. She looked up at him, and in my case it was certainly the latter. I am sorry I did not listen to you. I am sorry that I imprisoned Theophonsia for who her father was, Elinsco for defending his friend, and Fiesel for who his wife was and where his allegiance lay. I am sorry I almost let that woman die, and I am sorry I kept them apart for so long. She took his hand a little awkwardly and leaned against him. I love you, Rissisho. If nothing else, I want to tell you that, and I hope that beyond will forgive us for what we did. He nodded. As do I, Silesisha. They kissed.